Ukraine has unleashed what may be its biggest missile and drone blitz, hitting dozens of targets up to 1,000 kilometers inside Russia. Russia has replied, and Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk has accused Moscow of a campaign of air terror sabotage. Kyiv again. My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defence editor at The Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news and analysis from the war in Ukraine. We're starting with spectacular footage and reports of a massive Ukrainian attack across targets in Russia, some reaching more than 1,000 kilometres into Tatarstan province. Russia's Ministry of Defence has said at least 6 ATACMS long-range ground-launched missiles and 6 Storm Shadow bunker-busting cruise missiles, which were donated by the United Kingdom to Ukraine, took part in this attack. Various other Russian officials have said that more than 40 drones were involved, but that's just in a handful of these locations. The real number is likely far more. They hit targets in Bryansk, Saratov, Tula, and, as I've mentioned, Tatarstan. It's Saratov, which is about 500 kilometres from the nearest Ukrainian-held territory. There was an oil storage depot was destroyed, a refinery was hit, also suggestions that an aviation fuel storage facility was destroyed, and a warehouse holding glide bombs and cruise missiles. All of that part of Ukraine's long-running campaign to degrade oil infrastructure, and clearly that attack on that warehouse to try and destroy Russian ammunition stocks. And we've seen that before as well. Now, that attack in Engels literally came days or possibly even hours after Russian authorities had put out a fire from a very similar attack on a oil storage facility, which we reported in last week's episode, which triggered a days-long inferno. It took authorities at least 5 days to extinguish that blaze. In Bryansk, much closer to Russia, about 100 kilometers from the closest Ukrainian territory, reports that a chemical plant was hit. This is a plant which, according to Ukrainian officials, makes components for the Kh-59 missiles. Ukrainian officials saying that they used drones to overwhelm local Russian air defences before sending their missiles through. Also reports that a microelectronics plant in Bryansk was also damaged. This, we understand, made parts for air defence and missiles. Of course, componentry absolutely vital, especially to Russia's most high-tech weapons, and those components have become harder and harder for Russia to source because of sanctions. So any stockpiles or manufacturing capabilities are going to be vital to Russia's war effort. In Kazan, now this is the area furthest from Ukrainian territory, that is in the Tatarstan Republic, at least 1,000 kilometers from the closest Ukrainian-held territory. And of course, it depends exactly where you measure from, and the front lines of what Ukraine holds are moving daily because of the conflicts inside Ukraine. Local media reports inside Russia suggesting that a Gazprom facility holding liquefied natural gas was hit, 3 tanks on fire. Also, in the final strike that we're reporting as part of this massive Ukrainian wave in Tula, that's about 300 kilometers inside Russian territory, a chemical plant hit, the governor saying at least 13 Ukrainian drones involved. Russia has responded with a massive cruise missile and drone strike right across Ukraine, hitting targets as far apart as Poltava and Lviv. This again, part of that consistent pattern of Moscow's attempt to try and degrade particularly Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The last time we spoke about this, we talked about how Ukraine's energy infrastructure had shuddered. Those are the words of a Western official following this very closely, but it was still standing. Blackouts now becoming part of daily life for most people in Ukraine. This missile blitz did force Poland, a NATO country, NATO neighbour, to scramble fighter jets whilst the Russians' missiles were in the air in order to defend its airspace because of the possibility that those missiles may have strayed into NATO airspace. While we're on Poland, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk has accused Russia of a campaign of air terror. Now, that's not actually a reference to these daily and nightly airstrikes and missile bombardments with cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles and drones. It's actually a reference to Russia's campaign of sabotage. He said Russia had launched this campaign of air terror against Poland and airlines worldwide. And that's what we're going to be discussing in today's exclusive members-only content. So if you'd like to get a summary, a readout, an in-depth look at Russia's campaign of sabotage, which includes assassination attempts, surveillance, and attempts to destroy water and critical national infrastructure facilities, then do join Frontline for the chance to watch that exclusive members-only content. Other news from the war that we're going to touch on this week: at least 2 North Korean prisoners of war have been captured by Ukraine. These are from the some 12,000 North Korean soldiers who were sent to fight in Russia. They are fighting Ukrainian forces in Kersk province, Russia's Kersk province, where Ukrainian forces have captured a swathe of territory since August. Ukrainian forces are under immense pressure there. They now hold around half the 1,000 square kilometers which they initially captured in August, as Russian forces have been pushing them back, and those North Korean soldiers have been playing an increasingly important role in the Russian attempt to recapture that territory. What's interesting is I read a report from a Ukrainian blogger, a filmmaker turned soldier, who was actually saying that these North Korean soldiers, he was paying tribute to them in a sense as warriors, making the point that they cannot be dismissed. They have been fighting well, and that is of concern to Ukraine, and he was saying should also be of concern to the West, because of course North Korea's soldiers haven't really been tested in battle, certainly not a conflict like this, but the suggestion was they are performing well. Now, huge numbers of them, according to Ukraine, have been killed and wounded already in the fighting. That's consistent with the sorts of Russian casualties, or the sorts of casualty numbers that Russia has been suffering. But President Zelensky suggesting that almost 4,000 of the 12,000 sent in that first wave have been killed or more likely wounded, but taken out of the fight. But the concern is, both in Ukraine and for Ukraine's allies, that North Korea is ready to send more. One of the most extraordinary videos to emerge this week appears to show a Russian vehicle being chased in a sort of cat and mouse game by a Ukrainian drone. Now, we don't know where or exactly when this footage was taken, but what it does show is a vehicle charging up the road with a drone flying above it. The vehicle then appears to turn around. The drone obviously can't stop quite as quickly. It slightly overflies but manages to turn around. We then see this Russian vehicle careering off in the other direction, followed by the drone, and out of shot we hear the sound of an explosion. As I said, unproven, unverified footage, but nonetheless extraordinary, a reminder of the sorts of technologies no doubt being employed in this conflict. If you've got any questions, then as always, please do ask them in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer as many as I can, both in next week's episode and of course in the comments. I'll get into those comments myself and enter the conversation with you. I've got quite a few to try and get through today, so I'll go through them quite quickly. Why doesn't the UN send peacekeepers to Ukraine? Well, the first answer is because there is not a peace yet to keep. If and when there are peace talks, then who monitors that peace, or perhaps who enforces it, will be a key part of those negotiations. Up until the point of this most recent conflict, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion, it was the OSCE, the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, of which Russia is a member, that was responsible for monitoring the front lines. But really all they did is monitor ceasefire violations. They didn't have any mechanism to enforce or to take action against either of the warring sides. There have been suggestions, and this comes on slightly to the next question. The next question is, are there plans to send Western or NATO troops into Ukraine onto the front lines? The reason I'm sort of linking these two is because there is a possibility that Western or NATO troops might play a role in monitoring or enforcing a peace agreement. In terms of are there plans to send troops to fight, short answer is absolutely not, no. However, there have been suggestions, and we've touched on this before, from President Macron of France and from senior UK security officials that perhaps French or British soldiers could deploy into Ukraine, but not to fight. The suggestion is that they would take over rear echelon roles like training, like the maintenance of equipment. And the reason they would do that would be to make training more efficient, but also to enable those Ukrainian soldiers currently performing that role to move forward to frontline positions to where the fighting is. This touches on another theme that we've consistently talked about, which is the shortage Ukraine is facing of trained military personnel. Ukraine, like Russia, has suffered enormous casualties. Russia has suffered far more, but has proven itself more able at this stage to replace those hundreds of thousands of soldiers, Russian soldiers, who have been killed and injured in the conflict. Ukraine has lost fewer soldiers, but has found it harder to replace them with its waves of recruitment and mobilization. Question number 3, when will they down the Kersk Bridge? There are a couple of questions on this, or why haven't they been able to down the Kersk Bridge? You'll remember the Kersk Bridge, a hugely symbolic infrastructure project which Vladimir Putin personally opened, linking mainland Russia to the eastern tip of occupied Crimea. Putin boasted when he opened it that he had succeeded where the Tsars and Stalin had failed. Ukraine has tried to destroy it. They've they've exploded a truck bomb on the bridge. They've hit it with missiles. They've also launched sea drone attacks in the vicinity of the bridge. Why haven't they managed? Well, it's incredibly hard to destroy bridges with missiles, even with Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Ukraine, as far as we know, does not have the sorts of missiles that might be able to down that bridge. I mean, it's a huge piece of engineering. It's at least 2 lanes wide in both directions for vehicles, and there are also railway lines attached to it as well. You can blow holes in it, missiles can blow through it, they can knock out individual sections of it, but very hard to collapse it completely unless you're able to get up close and lay the charges on the most vulnerable and sort of important points on that bridge. And it is incredibly well defended. It's something Ukraine would like to do, but at the moment has proven unable to do. Next question. Surely the oligarchs, the Russian oligarchs, are not happy about their fortunes dwindling as a result of this conflict. I think it's a very astute observation. Certainly they are not. What has been a surprise and a disappointment to Ukraine's Western allies is that those oligarchs, many of whose money is invested and now frozen in accounts around the world, have been unable to exert sufficient influence on President Putin to restrain him. Not only were they unable to stop this conflict happening, it seems that they've been unable to do anything to encourage Vladimir Putin to retreat or at least temper his aggression. Next question, active protection systems. Why are Ukraine's allies willing to put a system like Trophy on the tanks that Ukraine is fighting with? Trophy is an explosive reactive armour. It's a type of armour that clads onto tanks, and when it senses something coming towards it, like a missile or a threat, it explodes outwards to try and intercept that missile before it hits the tank. We've seen ERA in action in Gaza. It's on Israeli tanks. Britain has ordered the Trophy system, which is an Israeli system, for its Challenger 3s, the upgrade to its tanks. Actually, Ukraine has already got systems, older systems like the Contact one on many of its Soviet-era tanks, like the T-64s, the T-72s. And we have, since Ukraine took delivery of Leopard 1s, the older of the 2 Leopard variants, donated by Germany and German allies, some of those have been fitted with Contact ERA. Final question for this week. Will Russia rearm if there's a ceasefire, and therefore will Russia continue to be a threat? I think it's a very astute question. The short answer is absolutely yes. Of course, it depends on exactly the terms of a ceasefire, but right now Russia has fully transitioned to a wartime economy. Moscow is pumping out munitions, putting as much energy and resources as it can. It's spending about 40% of its budget, of its annual government budget, on security and defence. If the war were to stop tomorrow, those factories would still be at full tilt producing weapons and armaments. And not just that, it would have a large army of battle-hardened soldiers, and those soldiers would be primed for another conflict. So yes, Russia would almost certainly continue to rearm. That is a concern I know is on the minds of senior defence leaders in this continent, and yes, Russia would continue to pose a threat. As ever, thank you very much for watching Frontline. If you do have any questions, please ask them in the comments below. And if you'd like to watch the next members-only episode on Russian sabotage, then please do join Frontline.